When our bodies get seriously hurt, what's actually happening on a microscopic level? I'm not talking about cells getting old and retiring gracefully. No, no. I'm talking about a sudden, violent death. A real cellular crime scene.
So let's just jump right in. Take a look at this. This is a lung, but it's been ravaged by tuberculosis. And that tissue is literally turned into this soft, crumbly cheese-like stuff. How does that even happen? Well, that is the handiwork of something called necrosis. And in this explainer, we're basically going to run a full forensic investigation to figure out exactly what's going on here.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll define what this uncontrolled cell death actually is. Then we'll investigate what triggers it. After that, we'll zoom in on the microscopic evidence, a cell's last moments. We'll look at the different case files or patterns of necrosis. And finally, we'll check out the aftermath, the big cleanup operation.
So first things first, what is necrosis really? Well, you can forget about a quiet, orderly process. This is more like a chaotic, messy, uncontrolled demolition.
The two phrases to remember here are degradation and inflammatory reaction. See, unlike other ways a cell can die, necrosis is messy. The cell literally bursts open, spilling all its guts out. And that spillage acts like a biological alarm bell, triggering this massive inflammatory response from the body. It's the body basically screaming, "Hey, we've got a breach over here."
And this is the chain reaction, step by step. It all starts when the cell's outer wall, its membrane, gets seriously damaged. That breach lets these powerful digestive enzymes out of their little storage sacs, the lysosomes, and they just start chewing up the cell from the inside out. As the cell falls apart, all its internal machinery leaks out, and that's the final straw that kicks the body's emergency response, inflammation, into high gear.
So, that's the how. But what about the why? What kind of an attack could cause such a catastrophic cellular failure? Let's put on our detective hats and investigate the motives.
Okay, the number one culprit, by a long shot, is a condition called ischemia. And all that means, really, is that the cell's lifeline, its blood supply, gets cut off. No blood means no oxygen and no nutrients, and without those, the cell just starves to death.
And this right here shows you the consequences perfectly. You're looking at a kidney. That blockage, or occlusion, in the blood vessel has completely cut off the blood flow to that wedge-shaped section. That pale, dead zone is called an infarct. Every single cell inside that area has died from necrosis.
But it's not always about a blocked pipe. Our cells are under assault from all kinds of things. We're talking harsh chemicals, crazy physical forces like intense heat or trauma, toxins from bacteria, and here's the kicker. Sometimes it's our own immune system overreacting that pulls the trigger, just like we see with tuberculosis. Okay, so we've got a cause of death. Now it's time to get out the microscope and look for the forensic evidence. What do a cell's final moments actually look like?
And wow, the difference is just night and day. On the left, you've got healthy kidney tissue. Everything's organized, you can see the individual cells and their nuclei. But on the right, in the necrotic zone, it's just chaos. The cells have lost their structure, the nuclei are fading away, everything's just falling apart. It's a total structural collapse.
But beyond just a general mess, how can a pathologist be absolutely sure it's necrosis? Well, they look for very specific clues, these telltale signs inside the cell itself. So what are they?
The smoking gun is always found in the nucleus, the cell's command center. Its destruction is not random. It happens in three very distinct, predictable stages. You could think of it like the cell's black box flight recorder. It tells us the story of how it went down. So first, you get pycnosis. This is like an emergency lockdown. The nucleus shrinks down into a tiny, dark, dense ball. Then comes karyopyxis. The control console just shatters. The nucleus literally breaks up into a bunch of pieces. And the final stage is karyolysis, total power grid failure. The fragments completely dissolve until there's nothing left. When you see that sequence, you know without a doubt you are looking at necrosis.
All right, so now we know how to identify the crime. But it turns out necrosis isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Depending on the weapon and the location, it can look very different. So let's open up the case files. First up, we have case file coagulative necrosis. This is the most common type you'll see. It's usually caused by ischemia. Remember that kidney infarct we looked at earlier? That's a classic example.
The tissue gets really firm and pale. And what's so wild is that under the microscope, even though all the insides of the cells are gone, their ghostly architectural outlines stick around for a little while. Next, we've got liquefactive necrosis. Now with this one, the dead cells are totally obliterated by enzymes, and the whole area turns into this thick, gooey liquid. You probably know it by another name, pus. This is what you see in bacterial infections, and fun fact, it's also what happens in the brain after a stroke.
And this brings us right back to where we started our investigation, caseous necrosis. The name literally means cheese-like, and it is the absolute hallmark of tuberculosis. It's kind of this weird hybrid of the first two types. The tissue is crumbly and white, and if you look at it microscopically, you'll see it's walled off by a ring of inflammatory cells called a granuloma.
And last but not least, there's fat necrosis. This happens a lot around the pancreas, when some of its super powerful digestive enzymes leak out where they shouldn't be. These enzymes start breaking down fat cells, which releases fatty acids. Then those fatty acids grab onto calcium floating around in the body and form soap. Seriously. This process is called saponification, and it leaves behind these little chalky white deposits you can actually see.
So, you've got this messy, chaotic, cellular crime scene. What's the body's plan? What happens next? Well, now we look at the aftermath and the arrival of the body's emergency cleanup crew.
The body does not mess around. The response is fast. First, it puts up a perimeter, walling off the dead zone with a red border of inflammation. Then it sends in the troops, these white blood cells called leukocytes. These guys are the cleanup crew. They perform a process called phagocytosis, which basically means they eat all the dead cell garbage, breaking it down with their own enzymes to tidy up the site.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? The body's strategy is all about containment. That red, inflamed border is a clear line in the sand. It's a firewall that the body builds to keep the dead tissue separate from the healthy, living tissue right next to it, making sure the damage doesn't spread.
So we've seen that necrosis is this violent, messy process. But it's also a necessary response when our cells face a lethal threat. It's proof that a battle was fought. But this whole thing leaves us with one last really fascinating question. We know necrosis is a reaction to injury, but we also saw that sometimes the body's own immune system is what causes it. So what happens when the very system designed to protect you is the thing causing all this destruction? It's a pretty wild